Welcome to Pick Your Niche. This is your guide to choosing a specialization. If you purchase this program, you probably have a forward-thinking mindset. It's probably safe to bet that you aren't going to settle into a general therapist demographic. You're going to be leaps ahead of your peers if you know what you're doing, and you will be on top of your field, and demand will absolutely be there with some solid steps. This is going to be a much shorter video than our Choosing Your Path video. And really, in this video, our goal is for you to specialize and tackle those supervision hours the most efficient way possible and save, honestly, a ton of years and a lot of money, especially if you are one of the unfortunate people that have to pay for your supervision out of pocket when you graduate. By the end of this, you will know what to look for when you're done with this course. You'll get a sense of how to negotiate what you want. At the very least, you are going to feel more confident when you get into those interview phases. So, as we've said this many times, there is no wrong choice. What you decide is going to be fine for you. It's going to work out, but we just believe that educated ones will allow for better opportunities. So one of the common things we see out of the academic gate is the tendency to be a pick-me, or I'll take what I can get. And we see that as a bit fear-based because you're not sure what you are allowed to negotiate, what you're getting into. You're probably feeling nervous about starting work. These systems can be overwhelming. We see over and over again how much agencies will take advantage of you. You will be going into this chapter with a good foundation. We don't want you to get stuck in grinding agency work. We want you making strides in this field. We are here to help you think outside of the box, and we're here to get you your goals of if you want private practice, great. If you're trying to find an ideal clinic that supports you, that's not so isolating, awesome. We're here to support your goals. So let's get you specialized. Whatever you choose, we can get you there faster with a few solid steps. So let's dive in.
We started Thrive Mind Labs because we realized how much information was being kept from all of us in the many different fields and how confusing it was. And what we realized is that we all had made mistakes along the way, or we could have done things more efficiently, and there was information and gatekeeping along the way that we wish we knew. So what we did was we did legwork, we interviewed more people, we did research to help filter out a lot of the noise, the institutional bias, the public bias. All of this information will help in the earlier parts of your career. Take what you need. We aren't academic and state advisors, so please keep that in mind. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Chapter 1. The first thing we're going to say off the bat here is it doesn't matter what your acronym is, you can specialize. So if you are an LMFT, or you're an LCSW, or you are an LPC, and if your baseline training doesn't match the direction that you want to specialize, that does not mean that you still cannot specialize and work towards that specialization. It doesn't matter what acronym you chose, you can still specialize. A lot of people think that they are stuck working on the demographic of people that their broad-based license focused on, and that is simply not true. That is our first myth we're going to bust for you. If you took our Choosing Your Mental Health acronym course, you're very well educated on why we don't recommend your degree to be a hyper-focused one, like becoming an art therapist or a music therapist out of the gate. You're coming into this course knowing that we only recommend license-specific accredited programs that are going to focus on a few broad licensure routes. Specialization boards may ask you if you graduated from a license-specific, nationally accredited graduate program. That's going to save them a lot of time, and it's going to save you a lot of time because they won't have to go through all of the syllabi that they're going to request from you to see if you've had ample and substantial education. So this is why we really promote that license-specific nationally accredited program, because when you go through that application to get specialized, you won't have to spend all of this extra time filling out the information that they need from you. This is going to save you, I can't even tell you how much heartache and pain. If you took our first course, you'll understand why we hit that home so hard, especially as you plan to specialize. We are launching from that baseline of understanding, and we're going into how to specialize after you have your license, ideally in your associate chapter during the interview phase while you're waiting for your license to post. Now, this information can benefit you at any point. So again, don't be stressed out if you're already at an agency and you haven't negotiated. You can always change things up. You're never stuck. This is all a psychological game. You're never stuck where you're at. So while you're waiting to get credentialed with your state board, meaning you just graduated, be doing research on where you want to work, how you want to operate, and hopefully with knowledge from this course, how you're going to search for your specific supervisor. And we're going to get into that. And this is all going to tie in. We can give you extra guidance on this after the course if you want one-on-one consulting specific to your situation, or by getting clear on your direction and where and how you want to be applying. So reach out for those consulting and coaching opportunities that we give you. So let's talk about how to take your broad license and work and build up towards your specialization, especially making you a strong candidate for interviews, whether that's graduate programs or for interviews if you're searching for a place to work. Whether you were sitting across from an academic committee, an agency hiring manager during your supervision years, or building your own practice, a defined modality does something a general clinical identity cannot. It makes you legible. Interviewers can place you somewhere. They know what you're going to bring to their team, what you're going to focus on, which populations you would serve well, and where you fit in the referral flow. So as you move through training, pay attention to what you keep returning to and let that become the answer that you give when someone asks what kind of clinician you want to be or where do you want to be in 5 years. I work relationally with couples, or I use exposure-based approaches with anxiety. Lands very differently than I'm open to anything. One sounds like a professional with a direction, and the other sounds like a person that's still deciding and they want to figure it out with that clinic. So if you don't have that baseline credential yet, lever the story that you do have. Say plainly that in doing this work, you realized you wanted to focus more deeply with children or with eating disorders or with sexual health, and that you are specifically seeking supervision in that direction. That framing is going to be really powerful for 3 reasons. It tells them that your interest came from clinical experience rather than a textbook. It signals that you intend to grow rather than just to coast, and it tells a supervisor exactly how to invest in you, which is often the deciding factor when a clinic is choosing between 2 similar candidates. You do not need the credential in hand yet to demonstrate this direction. You just need to be able to explain where you're going or where you want to go and why you're going there, and if they're going to support you during that. And that answer starts working for you long before any certificate arrives. If your direction does not match your broad-based license, don't apologize for that. It is not a weakness in an interview. It is evidence that you have been paying attention. Listen to how this sounds when someone says it out loud. Okay, here's an example. I trained as a social worker and spent my early years working with children. What I kept seeing was that so much of what showed up in the child was really living in the parent's relationship, and that is really moving me towards couples work, and it's why I'm applying here specifically, because this clinic has couples and sex therapy at its center. Long term, I am working towards certification in EMDR or ASECT or DBT or emotionally focused therapy. I want to become a specialist in internal family systems, right? Whatever you want to focus on. And I want you to notice what that does. It is not a story about a license that failed to fit. It is a story about a clinician who learned something real in the room and followed it. Your broad-based license stops being a mismatch and becomes the reason why you're choosing the route that you're choosing. You have systems training. You have seen the family context. That is not a detour you are explaining away. That is the clinician strength. The direction itself is the closing argument. So when you can name the credential that you're working toward, you are telling a hiring manager that you are not stopping for any job that will have you. You are choosing them on purpose because their focus and their trajectory point the same way, and that is a candidate that people remember. Build the answer before you need it. Where you started, what you saw, what shifted, and where you are headed, that is delivering so much strength, and it is your strength. I don't know what you guys think about that, but let's give you an example of how you can really set yourself up when you go into these, if you're thinking about a specialization and where you're coming from. Marriage and family therapists, they are your family systems, right? They work on relationship repair, family dynamics, system dynamics. They're going to be your EFT attachment theory. You're going to do some ecosystemic theory, certainly Bowenian and cybernetics, solution focused, and narrative. You'll see some of these across the board with all the licenses for sure, but just know that you are going to be getting the bare minimum training in any of these. You just dip your toe in the water, and that's why we really advocate for specializing. So let's get into LPCs, right? Generally, they're trained and they touch on CBT, a little bit of DBT, some motivational interviewing is a big one for them. ACT, REBT, solution focus. They really focus on the lifespan development. You're going to talk more about addictions here and probably more about suicidal ideation and how to manage that. And then, of course, psychopathology is there. Here we've got the LCSW. They're going to focus on that in-person, that person and environment, that attachment. They are very systems theory and heavy on the social justice, which is great. They're going to be more trauma-informed because they are in the trenches with their clients. They're going to understand systems really well and how they impact clients. Licensed clinical social workers have a general sense of the impacts of environment and how you cannot be separate from your environment. That is a similar thing with LMFTs. They just take a very different approach. So you're going to have compassion focus, motivational interviewing, narrative, Trauma-informed EFT and CFT these are emotion-focused modalities. We're going to make those connections here to kind of give you a general sense of how do you want to build on this if you're thinking about a specialization. If you're finishing a doctorate or considering one, here's something that surprises people. Your degree emphasis also does not lock in your specialty. Plenty of clinicians spend 5, 6, 7 years focused on one area, walk out with the degree, and then realize the population or the modality they actually want to build their career around, is something else entirely. And that is not a failure of planning. That is what happens when you spend years actually doing the work and your interests sharpen. The good news is that specializing after the doctorate is not only possible, it's extremely common. The bad news is that almost nobody explains the structures to you before you're standing in it, and the decision you make in your final year quietly determine whether specializing costs you 1 year or 5 years. So let's map it out. There are 2 distinct supervised phases at the doctoral level, and they work completely differently. Phase 1 is your pre-doctoral internship. This is the residency-like part, 1 full-time year, matched through a national process, highly structured, competitive, and completed before your degree is conferred. You do not get to freelance this. Okay, so phase 2 is your postdoctoral supervised experience, and this is where the flexibility lives that we're going to talk about and where most people misunderstand their options. As we'll say always, check your state first because this is going to apply to you, and before anything else, find out whether your state requires postdoctoral hours at all. Roughly half of state boards still require somewhere in the range of 1,500 to 2,000 postdoctoral supervised hours before independent licensures. The growing number of states that have eliminated the postdoctoral requirements entirely that allow you to license once your internship and other criteria are complete is still growing, so the variation is not small. Some states, they're going to want 3,000 total supervised hours, with half of them postdoc. Others want 4,000 total. Others want none after internship. So this is potentially an entire year of your life and an entire year of reduced earnings determined by which state you intend to practice in. If your state does require postdoctoral hours, you have 2 structural options, and they suit different lives. Outside of formal fellowship structures, postdoctoral supervised experience is largely self-arranged. That means employment at an agency, a group practice, maybe going private practice, where a licensed psychologist supervises you to your board specifications. So state boards typically care about the supervisor's credential, often a licensed psychologist with a minimum number of years post-licensure, along with weekly face-to-face supervision minimums and direct client contact percentages. They generally do not care whether the setting carries a fellowship label. Now, in academic and medical centers and VA systems, postdocs are usually formal, structured fellowships. They are less flexible, definitely more competitive, and they are the specialty training, and they are what the prestige specialties expect. So the trade-off looks like this. Formal fellowship, that's your less control over your location and your schedule. They're going to be more competitive, and it is the strongest specialty credibility and the clearest alignment with board certification later. Number 2 is that self-arranged supervised practice, and this is where you're going to live, or where our specialization opportunities live. This is going to give you more control over where you live, what population you see, and how fast you move. Neither is wrong here, okay? But choose deliberately because this is the single highest leverage decision in your specialization. But where our doctoral edition for this comes in, this is going to save you the most time, and it works the same way as it does for master's level clinicians in their associate phase. So more specialty credentials share 3 requirements, and this is across the board. You've got your coursework, specialty-specific clinical hours, and supervision from someone who holds that credential. What stops people is assuming that they cannot start any of it until they are licensed. And for many credentials, this is just simply not true. During your postdoctoral year, you can often be building all 3 at once: your state supervised hours toward licensure, your specialty clinical hours, and your specialty coursework, and your specialty supervision. Your lever is your supervisor, and we're going to talk about that next. So the next question in this chapter is, how do you want to stand out? What is it that you want to be? Who do you want to be in a sea of clinicians? And what do you want the next few years to be like for you? And I don't want you to be limited on it because you're unsure, or because when you look around or you look at the clinics around, you might live in a state where you only have one supervisor that is specialized in the thing that you want to do. And that might be your only option. And that happens. Let me just say that does happen. Don't let these limitations and restrictions stop you. Just acknowledge and recognize that there are going to be limitations and restrictions based on where you live and what your options are, and really where you can get your education as well, right? Where you live and your demographics are also going to be informed by the direction and options that you have, not only for your education and the city that you live in or the town you live in. This is something that you're going to have to consider, right? Like, think about it from this lens. Like, where do you imagine more wilderness therapists are going to be? Where do you imagine more sex specialists are going to be? Where do you imagine you're going to have more transitioning clients, or maybe disordered eating clinics, right? You're going to be thinking about demographically and the type of pressures and the environments and the ecosystems that really start to show up because of the area's demand. So think about it from that lens. What do you find in your area that doesn't have a lot of access? Well, there you go. You're going to be really busy. So think about this from your own interest, from the demographics that you want to work with, where you want to go, where do you want to be? Do you want to move over state lines? Do you want to stay where you're at? You've got tons of options here. I think the next thing to go into is sort of the emerging modalities, and then we're going to talk about very specific specializations. But when you think about emerging modalities, you really want to think about what is the general patient or the general client getting the majority of their information from. And we could argue that it's social media, right? So a lot of buzzwords, a lot of terminology people are going to be coming to you looking for are these ones, right? Here we go. Here's the list. All right, so one of the big ones is somatic body work, holistic therapist, right? Internal family systems. This is becoming more popular. People really like it. It's popular because it works. Clients are going to be coming in and they're going to be talking about their attachment or EFT. And then some clients are going to have any information at all about any of this stuff, right? So, the more you specialize, the more you're going to find people who are looking for you. And I think that's an important thing to note here. And then, something to really think about when you're talking about trauma. It's a program buzzword. People talk about it all over the place. Despite the buzzword, it's very hard to find truly trauma-informed therapists. And don't say that you're trauma-informed lightly. This is where those certifications are going to be really important. So let's move on. So we use an example here of John Graves, who has his MS. He's an LPC, and he has a certification in dialectical behavioral therapy. And we're going to talk about the nuances between some of these, titles by your name and what they actually mean. And the reality of the situation, fortunately or unfortunately for your clients, is they don't really know the difference between someone who is a C-DBT or somebody who's a DBT-LBC. There are massive differences in what is getting credentials or getting an actual specialization certification and what is taking some courses and receiving some certificates. Every board or every title next to your name is going to have regulated expectations on that. And so just know that the majority of your clients, again, for better or worse, aren't going to really know the difference. They're just going to see on your profile, right, that you have taken some classes in internal family systems. Does that mean you're an internal family systems specialist? Not necessarily, right? And so this is where the nuance of really being good at what you do and getting that extra credentialing can set you apart when you have that level of training. It's not about just the psychology and the perception of what the clients see here. It's about your confidence going into working with these clients because you have the experience that comes with getting these certifications. So that's enough on that. But if you are looking for a supervisor, we will give you a couple examples on how to find one that's going to be aligned with your interests, and also how to search for a supervisor if you are interested in going in a specific direction for specialization. You can close the gap of what a clinical psychologist charges with a master's degree and a specialization certificate. Here are some examples of master's, graduate level licensed clinicians who have specialized. And what's great about once you get specialized, then you can really say what your specialization is and what you work toward and start catering to a very specific clientele. And that clientele will be looking for you. So here you go. You have their membership requirements when you are in that specific field. You can see here examples of the signature you're going to have once you get that acronym after your name. And so let's look at a few examples of some of these specializations so you get an idea of what we're talking about. Every specialty program is a bit different, but there are some general observations across practices. So be sure to check because they do change. But you can see a list of 3 examples we've talked about here and some of the requirements, the costs, the supervision requirements, right? I think the big thing to note here is you generally have a structure. So that could be training, you have supervision, and that could be either by fidelity or counted hours, and then you have your clinical. Don't get overwhelmed by those numbers because the demand for these things is incredibly high, and you're going to be charging top dollar. MDRIA certification, right? This is route to trauma specialization. These have high insurance recognition. They are advanced behavioral models that help with complex emotional regulation and the training involved in that. And they're popular for embodiment, holistic, somatic therapists. People who really lean into this certification find themselves in popular demand. That is the same for DBT. If you have a DBT LBC or a CDBT, which is different, they are more intense personalities, but these are very structured clinical settings. These are great for people or anyone who feels dysregulated easily. They struggle to maintain relationships. These programs help build self-agency and accountability. And it's one of the few effective treatments for the more challenging personality disorders. High demand here. Therapists who really thrive on structure are going to do really well with these specializations if they really want to work with that demographic. Another high demand area of focus could be your ASEX certification or becoming a sex therapist. And you can do a broad reach of specializations. You could do pelvic pain, you could work with transitioning clients, you can work with kink or BDSM, you can work with couples who are struggling to maintain intimacy, you can work with, hypoarousal. There's such a broad range with sex therapy that makes you high demand. And it's an area that I think culturally people don't talk about. People want to talk about it somewhere, if that makes sense. So let's move on. Okay, guys, so this is our dual approach. Let's talk about what that's going to cover. We're going to talk about 1, how to count your hours. 2, the type of supervision setup you need to count your hours. 3, what type of supervisor you're going to look for to save time and money. And then 4, what to expect regarding both specializing committees and state board requirements. So let's get started. Okay, so make sure when you do an LLM search or you're using something like ChatGPT, you need to understand how inaccurate those results are going to be. They will often digest information from those sites, the specializing sites, incorrectly. They are going to say things pretty confidently that you can and cannot do because of how it is worded on the site. So what we're going to recommend here is really make sure that you're confirming with the specializing committees by email or phone, A, when you can start counting hours, and B, if years in the field as an associate count towards those years that they expect you to have. So when you're asking about those years, do they count only the years while you are being supervised under a specialist supervisor? And can you start counting those hours as an associate under the right supervisor? Basically, you want a clear understanding of when you get to count your hours, can you do them as early as possible, and what are the requirements to start counting hours, and when do the years start when I have all of the required things going for me, right? Especially regarding years, like do you get to count your associates? That's a great question. Can you count hours toward your board license and toward your specialization board or your specialization committee? The answer is yes. Right out of the gate, you can start getting your regular supervision and you can start counting hours toward your specialization supervision hours if you have the right supervisor. And this means that your hours could count towards both. This is not double dipping because you're not taking the same client and submitting that person's hours that you did with them to different categories to the same state board. We want to be clear on the difference between double dipping and what it means to submit your hours to separate boards. Some specializing boards will require you to have an annual membership, depending on your specialization, and they will give you early career membership rates. Your membership does need to stay active while you're getting your supervision. Your board-specific contract is going to have to be signed before you can count your hours. You're going to do that with your state board, and you're going to have to do it with your specializing committee or your specializing board. It depends on, obviously which choice you're going to use for your specialization and what their requirements are. So you're going to have to look that up. But once it's signed, you can record your hours toward both. So 1, sign a specific contract with your supervisor. 2, pay for the annual membership. 3, track your hours very specifically. And then you're going to finish your program. Then you're going to submit your application to your specialization board. In general, it's pretty straightforward, but that's the general gist. So let's go on to the next section. So we want you to find a supervisor who has the credentials and ability to supervise you for your state requirements and for your specialist hours. And to save the most time and money, doing this as a fresh associate is going to allow you to start counting your hours as soon as possible. This is where you're going to get your most bang for your buck, not only from a monetary perspective, from a time savings perspective. Those who are in private practice right off the bat are going to be more painfully aware of the cost of supervision, which will show you some of those numbers and how much this component of the field is not talked about. But that said, this avenue will give you the most freedom to find the right supervisor. And we want you to find a supervisor who is also a supervisor in that specialization. I said that twice. But you're going to be able to count your hours for both boards, and they will be better apt to help you understand the processes and maintain your associate requirements because they've been through this as supervisors on their own and going through supervisee supervision and understanding state requirements. Agencies tend to hold your hand during this, but a solid supervisor will and should be able to help set you up the right way. An option you will see the most are clinics or agencies that take on associates and then they supervise you. If that's the case, they should absolutely be paying for your supervision. We have heard that this is not always the case, and that's unfortunate, but we also have heard that agencies will give you a stipend or they will pay for your supervision. Now, this does kind of suck if they don't pay for all of it, but if this is your situation, I recommend leaning into it and working with it. So turn this limit into lemonade. Work towards negotiating who you want your supervision or supervisor to be and who you want to do it with, and if they will provide that stipend or that payment towards your supervisor of choice. If they won't let you pick your supervisor, okay, but if they also refuse to cover you and they only pay a portion of your supervision, I can almost guarantee you that there are going to be a lot of problems with that agency. And to me, in my bias, this is a red flag. Everyone is already likely probably being underpaid at that place. They're likely a money-hungry, soul-draining agency that is disconnected from the reality of agent work, and they have a high turnover rate. Probably have some unhappy patients or clients. It just seems like if they're not taking care of their clinicians or they're not interested in supporting a specialization that's going to make their agency, quite frankly, look really good, this is a problem in my perspective. So, and an advocacy side note here for you guys, make sure that the agency that you choose is paying you enough that if they don't cover your health insurance, that you can afford your own insurance. Most agencies that don't cover your health insurance are also not paying you enough to cover yourself, and this happens more often than we would like to see. So here's what we're going to say. You're not going to thrive here. In some ways, poverty will make you feel even more stuck in that agency, and it's a really bad cycle to get sucked into. It's so hard to get out psychologically. Some agencies will only allow you to work with the supervisors at the agency they provide, like hospital settings and such. And there's solid reasons for that, but you may be able to ask for some of the supervision to be directed towards your specialization, and you can certainly ask and try to negotiate that. And here's what we're going to say. You're only going to be told no or yes. So if you ask, the most they're going to say is yes or no. So just if you don't ask, you're never going to get the answer to it. Another option is to get supervision on your own time while you're at an agency to start continuing your hourly counting. And we have absolutely seen this, and it's smart from a time perspective. The other option is finding a clinic that is already focused on your specialization journey, like an OCD clinic, disordered eating clinic, a DBT specific clinic, But don't assume the supervisor is a credentialed supervisor for the specialization board. Make sure that you're asking for a certified supervisor instead of a regular one, because then you can start counting those hours if that is a board regulated requirement. And here's what we'll say. Most agencies just care that you're getting supervision and following the state requirements. A great negotiating tactic and argument could be that the more supervision you have in a specialty will make their agency look great. Not only are you going to start getting those clients coming in more, but they're going to advertise for you. So it would behoove you to let them know that it benefits them. They absolutely love niche areas because they know there's high demand. And there's higher demand for you than there's going to be just a general therapist. So clinics often have, a business mindset, and they generally won't turn someone away who wants to specialize if they are a reasonable agency. Okay, so let's get into some numbers here. Let's do some math and show you how this approach can really save you.
Okay, so let's look at some examples here. How are you going to save time and money? We're going to just go with ASECT as an example. So with ASECT supervision, outside of your state board supervision, if you do these separately, you're going to have individual supervision and you're going to have group supervision requirements. 30 hours of those are listed for individual, and then 20 hours of those are listed as group. So we say take advantage of the group supervision because then you get a lot of context. But if you decide to specialize after you get licensed, you're going to expect to pay another $7,500 in supervision on top of the program cost, right? And that can be between $5,000 to $8,000. And if you're not taking a dual approach, you have 2 years of regular supervision that you're going to have to submit to your state board. How do we get this to be cheaper? Because, we have an example here for New York. We took an LMHC who has 30 clients a week. They are under supervision for 100 weeks, the duration of their associate license. And they have a 100 supervision hour requirement. So at $150 an hour, your agency or you, depending on how you set this up, is going to pay for your supervision. And that's going to be roughly around $15,000 if the supervision hourly is $150. So if you decide to wait until after you're licensed, it's unlikely that your agency is going to cover that $7,500, and then you're going to be in supervision for another year or two, right? Depending on how many of these ASEC specific hours you're able to get. So we really want you to do the dual approach here, because if you can cut out that $7,500 coming out of your pocket and save yourself 2 years, but additionally, if you do that dual approach and you get that supervisor who will be able to submit and apply to both boards, your agency is going to pay for it. That $15,000 is going to cover your ASECT and your regular supervision. And if you decide that you want to go into private practice, well, you just gave yourself a 50% off deal, right? So
That's cool. And then all you have to do is pay for your program. So you're going to save a ton of money here. And by the time you are fully licensed, you're going to be able to, within a reasonable and short amount of time, depending on the year requirements of the specialization program, you're going to be able to call yourself a specialist and focus on that. We love this approach. We hope it makes sense for you. We're happy to clarify anything if it feels confusing. Yeah, that's it. That's it. So the next question is a personal one. What niche are you interested in? And we're going to leave you a non-exhaustive list of ideas to specialize here. So a common concern for therapists is their ethical obligation to being available for those in need, for people with a lower economic status who can't afford you. And I think as you become in a higher demographic of earners in the therapy field, as you get specialized, you're gonna probably want to be thinking about how you want to be available for people who can't afford your rates. And I'm going to leave that up to you to decide, right? Maybe you have a percentage of your clientele that in your week that is for people who need sliding scale. Maybe you have 2 or 3 slots in the week that are for people who can't afford your rates, right? It is your call and what you want to do, but just know that charging top dollar doesn't mean that you have to throw out your moral or your ethical standards here, if that makes sense. This is really only the beginning of your epic journey. This is it. This is us just trying to save you time, money, ways to do it efficiently. You can always take your courses later. You can start getting your supervision now. There's no wrong approach to this. You can start your courses right away. Thank you for investing in yourself. Specializing early can save you time and money. You are going to be a strong candidate if you know your direction and how to really approach your interviews like we talked about. Remember, don't be afraid to negotiate it with an agency that you want to work at. Don't be a pick-me. You have options. People want specialization-focused clinicians. Okay? Now go make yourself an in-demand clinician, and thank you so much for being here.